think music is one of the things that, just like other art forms, I think it helps us to transcend beyond our humanness.
It just keeps me going because you can be doing the same piece of music all the time, and you kind of get tired of it. But then maybe you hear another artist perform the music, and it's totally different, and you didn't realize that could be done that way. And that's what I think is so exciting about it. I just get a lot of inspiration from it. It's just enjoyable. It's always been that way.
Music is the language of the soul, and I really feel that's the case. It somehow speaks to one's heart and takes you beyond yourself. How we started out was Rudy was helping me with editing, and we got used to working together that way, and we kept talking about collaborating on pieces, and he is wonderful in arrangements and also accompaniments. You told me you really like the intro, and it has that the bridge section in it that
she has pretty much the format of the text that she wants us to work on, and she will write out usually the choral parts. And if it doesn't have all the parts written, mainly she has some type of melodic line for the text, and then usually the instrumentation she may want to use. Like here we had all these different instruments. She may want to use, let's add harp for this movement, or cello, or so forth.
And I was going to play around with taking the voicing like in the beginning, and try to work that into this to see if that would work. He looks at a piece, he instinctively knows what needs to be done to really make the piece the best it can be. And so he will go and look at the voicing and decide if he wants to make any changes to that, and he'll look at the same thing for the instruments. And then usually the last thing he'll do is the accompaniment. And so there was this piece that we wrote, was an Advent piece, and he had kind of rearranged some of the voicing, and I thought it was one of the most beautiful things I had ever heard. I was so excited. And at that point, I just said, Rudy, I cannot just put you down as the accompaniment. I said, you're really a co-composer, and if you don't mind, I'd like to start presenting us that way. And so that's how Davis and Lipinski came about. Well, it's the Requiem Mass in the Catholic Church set to music. We used a lot of the text, not the full text, but quite a lot of the original Requiem Mass text from the Catholic Church.
It could be for one person, it could be for a group of people, or for all the faithfully departed souls. And basically, it's Tori wanted to write one. And it wasn't my idea, but that's what she wanted. She wanted to try to do this. And we looked online to see what different texts we could use, and just went that way.
We researched the text and decided on 12 different passages of the Mass that we would use. And so that's how it came about. not all requiems are alike, which was a little bit to my surprise when I got into it. Some composers choose psalms to use, and other composers will have a Gloria as part of it, and so it seems like every requiem is a little bit different in what the composer selects to include.
Of course, Mozart Requiem. Then there's Verdi's Requiem. Brahms' Requiem. There's others in the 20th century. A very popular one is one by John Rutter. It's very nice. I mean, different composers have used this particular type of genre just to write a piece, basically to memorialize either a person, like I said, or a group of people, or people who have died in service and wars and things like that.
I guess it came about from hearing some requiems by other composers. One was John Rutter's Requiem that I thought was gorgeous, and of course the classical composers. I just thought they were beautiful works. And so I'd been thinking in the back of my mind I really wanted to do that. And so when I started working with Rudy, after we had worked together for a while, he said that he thought we needed to start thinking in terms of doing bigger works, major works, rather than just individual anthems. And so I asked him, well, what specifically do you mean? And he said, well, like the Holy Spirit Mass, and then I mentioned to him that I really wanted to do a requiem. And he liked that idea. From the very beginning, we started submitting works for Dr. Stephen Walker's consideration as director of the East Central University Chorale and the ECU Singers. And we never take that for granted. We just hope he's going to like what we present. And so we always just try to have 2 pieces for the singers, 1 per semester, and 2 pieces for chorale, 1 per semester. Sometimes we even have more for him to choose from. And then we try to do something for the composer's concert, which is usually in February. So that's a minimum of 5 works every year that we really push to have. And then in addition to that, we like to write simpler music for church choirs to sing, and 1 or 2 solos. So we usually write about 7 to 8 pieces a year. And so the Requiem, when we started, was in addition to all of those other things that we do.
We've been doing, gosh, I don't know, for 10 years, maybe longer, I've been doing their music. And I've watched them grow as composers. And if you compare what they're doing now with what their first works, their first attempts, it's on a completely different level. They just keep getting better, which of course, that's what we should all do.
Rudy was very wise in saying from the very beginning that he did not want any deadline on this Requiem. So each piece we would just spend as much time on as we needed to until we were very satisfied with it. It was a 4-year adventure. The first piece of the Requiem was finished in 2009. And so we had written, obviously, starting in 2005, quite a bit.
Some composers will try to make each movement go a segue into the next, but we didn't do it that way, but each one is an entity of its own.
We had no idea how long the Requiem was going to be when we started working on it, so we were delighted when it came in right under 60 minutes.
I think this particular work has something for everybody. They can't say everything was the same. There was a variety of styles in this piece, and it was intentional. Because like the first beginning of the whole piece, to me, reflects a lot, to me, is the style of Beethoven. But then it goes into something else, but it doesn't stay that way. And then you have one section where it's in the, Dies Irae, where it's, it's the Day of Wrath and everything. And then there's this part that goes into like it's some kind of a party or something. It's this really very Latin style. But those are a lot of influences that I have in my music. But I put that in there because, you can get very solemn and kind of pretty, make it dark and sad, but that movement it just like changes moods a lot.
When we finished, it was in August of last year in Rudy's kitchen, and it all came together so fast in the summer. I really had not expected us to finish it until maybe this year. So when it came together and he did the demo CD for it and handed me the CD, I unexpectedly just broke down, literally weeping in his kitchen. And I guess it was just pushing for so long and working so long on this. And he stood there, and of course he didn't know what to do. I was just sitting there in his kitchen just weeping. And he finally said, "Well, it's a Requiem. I guess it's a little sad."
I know Tori gets excited, but me and everybody asks me, "Aren't you excited?" Well, I mean, to me it's the performance, and it's the same. I know it should be different maybe, but I've done so many different things, it's hard for me to get excited about my own things or whatever. I almost would have liked maybe if somebody else performed it, but that's okay. I mean, that's no big deal. I wouldn't mind if somebody else performed it. It would be nice to listen to it. But then I probably would sit there, I would have done that different. I would have played that differently. I don't know.
I've just never been so excited about anything, I don't think, as much as this. It was just thrilling. Especially when you're going to have percussion. It really helps to have really powerful voices. But one thing Dr. Walker seems to just get power out of all of his choirs. He's just a tremendous director, and the success of the Requiem we really owe to him for wanting to perform the whole thing in total and just to give his heart and soul to it, as did each of the students in the East Central University Singers. All of them worked so hard on this, and for a composer, it just doesn't get any better than that.
Some pieces require a great amount of interpretation. The piece is more like it's not a schematic, it's a suggestion, so to speak, for the conductor. And the Requiem would not be one of those types of pieces. It's more of a schematic. So it wasn't terribly difficult to conduct, except for the duration of it. Choral music, except for large extended works, which we don't do that often, and that's, I think, the longest piece I've ever conducted. Choral works tend to be from 2 to 7 minutes. That's what I'm used to doing. Then you get to take a breath and you get to go on. And so doing something extended like that, a symphony conductor, they do it all the time. We do short stuff in choral music, so that was a challenge for me. The piece is on par with compositions that are being written, contemporary compositions, by what those of us who are supposedly authorities consider to be the greatest composers that are working right now. And I think their piece is every bit as good and better than some. And so it's really a remarkable work. Now, their work in general, I think, is on par with some of these people that in choral circles would be considered very, very big names. So I have a very, very high respect for the work, and just their music in general I find to be very rewarding to work on, very rewarding to perform, and it's beautiful music.
I hope to touch people's hearts and get them to think about God, get them to think about heaven. And I had a dream several years ago, and in the dream, I was at the altar in our church, and in the dream, there was not only the close altar, but there was this other altar way off, with people holding out their arms. And I remember in the dream I asked him, well, what about these other people? And he said, well, those are really the unbaptized, and so they're not for this. And I remember in the dream I said, no, I must go to those hungry people. And so I looked at that as the Lord telling me that the music was going to be used in part to reach people who maybe didn't know God, or who were searching and seeking or hungry for God.
And using what she has written and utilizing that, it's adaptable to these different types of styles. I think one of the things that really worked out was the one called Lux Interna, which is basically the eternal light. And in this particular movement, the melody was really, I changed the rhythm of it, and it really worked well, the way the melody for this piece, and it had harp and organ and flute. And at the end of it, it goes to what it sounds like. You see little shines of light, and it comes, each voice is coming in with the sustained light. It keeps getting higher and higher. And the way I wanted it to end was to, you always hear people who have died, and they see this light, and it gravitates toward this light. It's like the one beautiful experience, and they, and and then they're brought out of it, and they really miss it. And that's kind of the way I wanted it to end abruptly, because it's so beautiful. I didn't want it to fade away. I wanted it to be shining brightly at the very end of it and then stop. But that was the effect that I wanted on that movement. And it's interesting, when you write something, and I always forget about it. I don't know when that was written, maybe 2 years ago. And we came back to it. She wanted to hear it. And I was just like amazed how great it sounded. But I didn't tell her this because I'm not sure why, but it just really moved me. It's something that really kind of worked.
There's a whole aspect of existence that's qualitative, subjective, emotional, aesthetic. I can go on in nature. And music, of all the art forms, according to a lot of philosophers, this is just not just my opinion, but Maslow and others, is the greatest way in human experience to have these, as Maslow calls them, peak experiences. Which, of course, anyone that's had these experiences know that we grow emotionally through these experiences, and they're very, very important parts of human experience. They're very hard to quantify. In fact, they're impossible to quantify because they're totally qualitative in nature. And so music, of all the art forms, I think is the most vital in human experience. And that's not to say anything negative about other arts, theater, visual art, and whatnot, but they're all very, very important. But the arts are very critical in human experience. It's one of the things that separates us from other mammals.
When we had finished the Requiem, it was the weirdest feeling because we had been working with this for 4 years, and I came home and sat down at the computer and stared at the computer, and it was like, well, what do we do now?
Composers will write it the way they want to, and then they let the theorists or the people who like to analyze, or critics, figure it out, and I let them do it.
Even if I just continued doing what I'm doing now, I would be elated. I just love this so much. It's just the gift from God.
View this program again anytime at www.youtube.com/cityofadaok.